Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new Skylanders Week video here on the channel. Another day means another review, and this time round the review centralises, of course, around the fast-paced gameplay shifting Skylanders Superchargers. This fifth installment of the franchise, as released in September of 2015, took Skylanders in a whole new direction. The twist being that now we can use vehicles to tackle 3 different terrains: land, sea and sky, resulting in a rather mixed bag gameplay wise, but games have more to them than just the gameplay, and it just so happens that with Superchargers, everything outside of the gameplay loop is phenomenal. So let's talk about it. Now, when it comes down to the true salver of this game, it has to be the story. It's easily the most interesting Skylanders story we've had to date, especially in terms of how they incorporate the gimmick into it. Its tethering to other Skylanders plotlines, as well as its darker tone and fast-paced progression, is what makes this such an interesting Skylanders story, which I alluded to earlier. Chaos has built from enchanted armor a device known as the Sky Eater, or as he calls it, the Doom Station of Ultimate Doomstruction. He uses it to eat away at the connection between the Portal of Power and Skylands, so now there is no way for Skylanders to be transported into Skylands using only the Portal of Power. Luckily, the Ancients created these magical relics called Rift Engines, and these Rift Engines are what powers all of the individual vehicles. And what's so special about Rift Engines is that they allow you to travel anywhere to and from Skylands as you please. It's effectively a teleporting device, so now we can take advantage of these vehicles to transport our Skylanders from our world to theirs, using these Rift Engines, now that we can no longer use the Portal of Power. It's due to its connection, well, the bridge between the Portal of Power and the Skylands even having been completely severed altogether. It's very cool how they shifted up this portal network almost, and they added lore behind the actual portals themselves, and it's just above all really clever and a really good way to justify putting your portals onto the vehicle again and again. Anyways, turns out the Sky Eater is powered by the personification of the darkness. Centuries ago, the Skylanders banished the darkness using the Core of Light, as we learnt about in Spyro's Adventure, but the Core only kept it at bay since it was never fully complete. So we now need to complete the Core, but just as things seem hopeful, Chaos and his Sky Eater show up at the Academy and destroy the Core of Light. But one final hope arises. The darkness was originally brought onto Skylands through the power of the Dark Rift Engine, and so we, as the Skylanders and the NPCs, are hoping that by acquiring this Dark Rift Engine, we can send the darkness back to where it came from and far away from Skylands forever. However, after that plan fails and the portal network starts to collapse in on itself, then the Skylanders power up their vehicles for the last time to permanently banish the darkness. This story is bold, it takes risks with its storytelling, especially in tone. When you start the game, there is an atmosphere of hopelessness as all of our friends have been captured, and there is no one here to help us. Skylands has basically given up and is at the mercy of Chaos now. Every time you discover something new and start on the road to victory, the hopeful feeling is directly juxtaposed by some tragedy to remind you of the constant threat that's looming. It raises the stakes, as the whole of the Skylands is on the line here. We're not talking about Skylands being conquered. The darkness simply wants to destroy it, not rule over it. So naturally this darker tone has you on edge, and the tension even is constantly built up. There is also some really big emotional moments as Glumshanks is fired, and so after he winds up at the Academy, he sacrifices himself so the Academy can escape from Chaos's Sky Eater attack when he destroys the Core of Light. Of course, it's revealed directly afterwards that he's fine, but it doesn't lessen the blow that of what came before it. So the darker tone and the atmosphere built up by this very unique and memorable Skylanders story with the twists and turns it takes to maintain your excitement is a rather thrilling rollercoaster ride. I love this story and how it can bring about such a strong presence and provide such poignant moments. And the elements of the story revolving around the Core of Light are great chunks of fan service to get me squealing as I reminisce over my nostalgic memories of Spyro's Adventure. Man, this game makes me smile. Now, this game certainly has its fair share of glitches, and it can crash from time to time, and sometimes collision just doesn't exist and you fall straight through the floor. But generally, it's nothing game-breaking. Even if your game crashes, there are checkpoints scattered throughout levels, so it's never much of a setback. And the game autosaves after every collectible and vehicle section, so in that case, there's never really much you need to repeat. In fact, if anything even, it's just like Trap Team. The absurdity of the glitches is funnier than anything else, is what I'm trying to go as far to say right here. And it certainly doesn't lessen the polish and excellent craftsmanship of this game. It's wonderfully made. Of course, other technical elements of this game, including its graphics, are phenomenal. This game is beautiful. The reaction of the water as you zoom through the sea and the detail put into it makes all the textures seem realistic and gorgeous to look at. The colours contrast each other so sharply even, and they really pop for a very cartoony and stylized art style. There are even cel-shaded graphics within the game, which not only look gorgeous, but they have a very distinctive art style with bright and vibrant colours, and I seriously respect his attention to detail to have this just stand out in terms of the art direction of this game, because it's so bold, and it really freshens up the gameplay, having to see all of these different cel-shaded paintings and all that. They look like paintings, and it's just so vibrant and gorgeous. It's beyond gorgeous. Gorgeous doesn't even start to scratch the surface of how good this game looks. I would go as far to say that despite being a Skylanders game, it's easily one of the best looking games I've ever seen. There are even trails left behind you where you walk, or cuts when you slice into the ground. It's all just so incredibly nice to look at, and I truly marvel at the developers putting detail into things which absolutely did not need that degree of detail, and yet they did it anyway. Now, I know Swap Force looked great as well, but Superchargers looks even better. Vicarious Visions took great pride in the game's overall presentation, even with the UI, as it looks real crisp and clean. The pause menu makes sense and even has little sound effects, which are great comedic additions to make it easy and fun to traverse those menus. The health bar shows both the health for your Skylander as well as the current shield level for your vehicle, all in the same place, so it's not scattered. It doesn't feel clustered either, because the positioning of it all feels natural, easy to read. And you know the game looks great when I start gushing over how great the UI is. Because imagine having the vehicle shields like in the top left rather than the bottom left where the Skylanders health is. It would be impossible to keep track of your shields and your Skylanders health at the same time. That just would make the gameplay a little less fun, because you can't necessarily maintain your concentration as easily. Now, for the music here, Lorne Balth has returned, and it's gorgeous. Each level has a gimmick to it, and the music is there to truly have the feeling sink in that you're sunken to the size of a grub, or driving along the back of a dragon. This game explores more than just Skylands. Vehicles are a crucial part of the game's theme, and the music reflects that, with fast pacing and tones that blend together to create something that you would imagine could come out of the Skylands. You know, the music feels appropriate for the world we're in, and on top of that, it also feels like the speed is matching that of the vehicle. It's a perfect blend to make for memorable tracks, which again increase your experience on the level at hand to truly make you immersed in what's around you. It's a phenomenal soundtrack, even almost as good as Giants, and if I'm comparing the music to Giants, then you know you've done a great job with it. But now, speaking about the levels themselves, yes, the gimmicks keep things fresh. You're constantly doing something new each level. You go from riding on the back of a dragon to slowly traversing through fog and electric traps. Sure, you lose the traditional exploration sense of Skylands, but I would sacrifice that for the constant shifting gameplay any day. Nothing becomes stale simply because it isn't given the time to. That alone can make the game very fast paced, and the only issue I have with it really is that the game is moving at 1 million miles per hour constantly. You're never given the time really to let things sink in. You're given this awesome new gimmick, and by the time you're done with it, it seems as though they only scratched the surface of what could be explored with this gimmick, and you wish that there were more that could be done with it, but there isn't, and you become disappointed that you never see it pop up ever again. Still though, I love these levels. They are very clever and very creative. Of course, they all have unique settings which differ from one another also, helping the experience of the game to sink in more because you're having that feeling of because you're never having that feeling of familiarity even. Everything here is stylized and unique thanks to the creativity put into it, and as such, everything is memorable, which is great, because the Skylanders is huge. You can't really see the same setting repeated too many times with just how wide and expansive these lands within the sky are. They're an infinite sea of clouds, for crying out loud. So having the different settings just makes sense logically, and is so much fun to explore. Now next up are the NPCs. They grow with the narrative instead of them being the cause of the narrative to move forward. So now, whilst the narrative moves forward, even not the narrative, I've never heard of that before, but regardless, whilst this narrative moves forward, the characters are impacted and developed by the events of the narrative. You know, normally we have Flynn's terrible decision to buy the Dread Yacht, and then that causes it to be shot down several times. For example, in Giants, the plot is progressed by Flynn's arrogance and unwillingness to accept that his ship is cursed almost. However, this time around, we have characters who are directly impacted by the events of the narrative, like Hugo, for example, as he grows more hopeful and courageous throughout the plot, but at the beginning, he has every reason to be fearful and upset due to just him being captured, Master Rion being captured, and him not even knowing where they can go to rescue him. And of course, you have Chaos with his Sky Eater that's gobbling up the sky. You know, he's a bookworm, he can't fight, so he uses his strength, and so he can't really use his strength to his advantage, so instead his greater strength is found in the knowledge of oneself, and Hugo truly learns that throughout the story as he steps up and uses his intellect to assist the Skylanders rather than said strength. I might be reading a little bit too into this, so let's acknowledge the obvious here, the inner conflict within Chaos. Now, Chaos's thoughts and inner conflict are rather on the nose, as he brings in an imaginary Glumshanks to basically tell the audience exactly what he's thinking, as he is torn between destroying Skylands and having the ultimate power of the darkness to conquer other worlds, or saving Skylands in order to rule it, but at the loss of the power of the darkness. It's a very compelling inner conflict, which keeps the tension maintained as he's unsure what he will do next. So ultimately, when he betrays the darkness and saves Skylands by coming to his senses and exclaiming his motivations during his victory, is glorious and a very satisfying culmination of his arc. Yep. The NPCs here are very compelling. It's the finest character writing we've ever seen, with excellent arcs and incredible chemistry amongst our cast, where we have put quality over quantity. We have Hugo, Flynn, Calais, Sharpfin, Mags, Buzz and Eon all returning, and these characters are here to elaborate and give further arcs for us to be compelled by, which I alluded to earlier, but not at the expense of their charisma and providing us with the charming presence we know them for already. It's effectively a culmination of the greatest NPCs we've seen thus far, so it's great to see the best of them all united. So I've told you already the quality of the story, the technical build of the game, the music, the level design, the graphics, the world building, and even the NPCs. They are all stunning and well crafted. However, this is where I address the problems arisen within the gameplay and the cast of characters. The Superchargers cast isn't great. I like how they've revamped old characters, they changed up their playstyle, so whilst they are familiar faces we love to have seen return to the franchise, with the completely different playstyle and the unique way in which they play now compared to their original counterparts, it takes away the laziness of reposes who are the exact same characters, just with a new WoW power and a new pose on the figurine. It's something to respect that they went through that cycle to improve upon these characters and give them something new to mess around with. However, the playstyle they've given us isn't always the best of improvements. Really, what I'm saying here is that a lot of these characters are quite lame. Most of these movesets don't flow and chain together nicely, like most of the Skylanders even. And their power levels are not balanced in the slightest, since a lot of them are really underpowered, taking away the satisfaction of playing as them, because you don't have that raw sense of power and chaos at your fingertips. However, you love the figurines. They are all incredibly well designed for the most part. Like, I can't get just over how cool and creative all these designs are. but they can become immediately disappointing, since most of the time the gameplay doesn't live up to the design, especially for characters named Fiesta. So the gameplay of new Skylanders themselves can be quite underwhelming, but there certainly are exceptions. For Tech, Earth and Fire Skylanders, for example, are phenomenal. And yes, I've changed my mind on Smash Hit due to the Skylanders Superchargers, Supercharger Noir Lock. He was OP and absolutely carried that series. And speaking of that series, this is for gameplay as what I did, the same gameplay even as what I did for that series. However, this time, you have it in full colour, so it's a very different experience. Now, when it comes to their vehicles, I can't really say the same. The vehicle sections of this game have many problems. First of all is their imbalance. Vehicles have huge hitboxes, whilst your enemies, they simply don't. It is easy to get overwhelmed by enemies, especially the tiny ones, leading to frustrating deaths, which truly do feel like they weren't your fault, because the very end pixel of your spoiler is hit by a molecule of dirt, so suddenly your Skylander is dead. I hate that. But for even bigger offenses for constant gameplay cycle, these sections all feel the exact same and they have very little to distinguish themselves from one another. They are all creatively bankrupt, as you seem to do in every single driving section. Go from point A to point B and fight some bad guys. Rinse and repeat. It gets tedious and repetitive very quickly, and it can put a huge drag on the pacing. It's a shame, because normally this is a very fast-paced game. The excellent level design as well as the charismatic and memorable characters make every section you're not playing as a vehicle or as one of the few Superchargers who are actually fun and incredibly fast-paced and enjoyable some of the highlights. But regardless, these non-vehicle sections are some of the greatest highlights of the series due to all of those things in combination with one another. Now, the gameplay cycle is fresh and experimentative, so I respect them trying to do something different. It's a shame it's all so repetitive and they don't mix up the formula nearly bit enough to keep things fresh. Honestly though, it's fun at first. It just loses its charm far too quickly. I would shape things up by making these more than just point A to point B based sections. I would add actual racing into the story mode. Say you have to race Chaos's enemies, and if you beat them you get an exclusive path with collectibles and money, which adds excitement and tension to the vehicle sections, but instead you drive along just avoiding hazards until you reach the next combat section. It's so unbelievably dull for me. It even takes away from the experience almost, and don't get me started on Seeing Skies sections, but since this is a review I kind of need to get started in them, which are easily the dullest portions of this game. Sky sections even often feel barren. There is so little to do as you fly in wide open spaces with a slow vehicle and spread out objectives. C sections have floaty controls which aren't fun because it feels like you constantly lose control of your vehicle. Its wide turns lead to places you never intended to go, and it's just plain frustrating. Luckily, all of these options are completely skippable. I wish the land sections were the same, because you could bypass the repetitive, tedious vehicle gameplay altogether and just stick to what the game does best. However, certain vehicle sections are really fast-paced and enjoyable, and they tend to redeem the entirety of the thing for me because they are just such highlights. Like the sea section from Captain Clux, I really enjoy that one. Or the land vehicle section from Cloud Breather's Crag, where you drive along the back of a dragon, for crying out loud. That is so cool, especially since I love dragons. They are my favourite fantastical creature by miles. I mean, they are giant fire-breathing lizards that can fly, for Pete's sake. What's not awesome about that? So if you just stick to the land sections and the non-vehicle sections and just skip over for sky and sea sections altogether, then you can find yourself having an incredible and fast-paced time. Post-game content is also incredibly lame. It near enough entirely centralizes around vehicles. You can perform challenges with supercharger combinations or race on tracks of each terrain, but the actual racing itself is fast-paced and the tracks are really creative and serve as great fan service, just like the story itself, as they act as little nods to Skylanders history, such as the Frozen Fossil Festivals, which is a direct reference to the Frostfest Mountains from Swap Force. And it gives me a smile even playing on these tracks, which feel like they belong within the Skylanders world. And the fact that you can play them online too against real people is really cool. They're even inspired by things in the Skylanders world, so that is why the feeling is so genuine, and it's why I wish the main vehicle sections of the story had all of the enjoyable racing elements, which worked so well here. So I wish they took it and applied it to the rest of the game. Unfortunately, that's where the post-game content really begins and ends. I mean, there are quests, but I couldn't really count those, just as I did with Swap Force as well, since all you do is return to old missions with new bonus objectives even, and challenges, because I can't seem to pronounce anything today. And it does nothing to offer up anything exciting or new, giving you no motivation or reward for playing past the credits. So I wish more effort was put into these post-game options. I would have loved to have seen bonus mission maps return, or the Chaos Doom Challenge, or even arena battles. But nope, they weren't added to any capacity whatsoever, and it's a damn shame. And a big one at that. What's also a really damn shame is that all of the gameplay that I'm screen recording right now seems to be buffering. My apologies about that. Sorry for the jumping for music back there. How I record these setups is that I simply have a YouTube video of the gameplay as I screen record all that, and then I have the soundtrack playing in the background as I speak. So naturally what happened with the buffering is that I took a short break from speaking whilst the buffering ceased to exist, you could go as far to saying. And naturally, whilst I cut out all of that, what I forgot to do was pause for the soundtracks. That just kept on playing whilst I cut out all of the buffering gameplay, mind you. So that's where the jumping music came from, but enough of exploring about this setup in front of you. I finally want to talk about the hub world. Now, it is the Academy, again, which could come across as lazy since that's the same as Trap Team. However, this time around it's more compact, so its size isn't as intimidating. I don't feel like I need a map anymore. And it can also be personalised. You can place legendary treasures as cosmetic items, making the traversal of your Academy unique to you. And I love that personal connection you have with your Academy, since you're the one designing it. It's so awesome. And so, in conclusion, the vehicle sections could have acted as a twist to the Skylanders formula with a fresh gameplay style, but they have terrible controls and unbalanced design, making them feel empty and lackluster, as they so easily could have implemented racing into the game. But instead we have an uninspired point A to point B based gameplay style, which just loops and becomes tedious and repetitive after a while. Even if the vehicle combat randomly thrown in can have some very good pace into it, but it does put a natural drag on the pacing, and it's a huge shame even considering how great the story is, with its memorable twists and turns to maintain your immersion and excitement, with its darker tone and natural course of development to make the NPCs as fun and as engaging as we've ever seen. The music is phenomenal, makes the surroundings of the game seem almost tangible as it adds to the intended experience, and pacing of the level, which are incredibly designed with unique gimmicks and settings to make each level distinctive, fresh and memorable. You could also draw attention to, of course, the incredible details within the graphics and the flush textures. It just gives the game a nice, bright and colourful aesthetic with incredible style and art direction. So all those things taken into consideration, I honestly think this is an innovative title for the Skylanders franchise. It innovated upon the gameplay formula, provided the freshest twist of the gameplay possible, even if some of the vehicle sections I very much criticise. You know, there definitely are some of them that weren't all that necessary, but on an overall scale, it was nice to have finally seen after the fifth game in, someone trying to tackle something new and mix up the formula a little bit to make things feel fresh. And this game just has such a distinctive and unique feel compared to other Skylanders games that I really respect it if I'm looking for an experience different to that of the other titles of the franchise. So naturally, it goes without saying that this served up innovation upon the Skylanders franchise formula. But now, with all that having been said and done, I'll be seeing you tomorrow with my review of the newest and final installment of the Skylanders franchise to date. That being, of course, Skylanders Imaginators. And until that review arises, peace! And thank you so much, as always, for watching.